Hey, well, we are live with session 4 of Growing Through Disruption. This is a series to help us get closer to Jesus, even as we are in the middle of a pretty big disruption. Because here's the truth. Whether you like it or not, we're all going through a disruption in our lives. But you actually get to choose whether or not you grow in the middle of this disruption. So I'm Steve, and we've talked the last couple of weeks about prayer, about Bible reading, about fasting, and tonight we're going to talk about two subjects that kind of go together that help all the others, if you can get them. What are they? They're called silence and solitude. Silence and solitude. Well, they come, like all the other things we're talking about from this book, spiritual disciplines for the Christian life. And that word discipline is really meant to be used in the context of training for godliness, not discipline as punishment, but discipline as a workout. And so while you are stuck at home or while your rhythm has been disrupted, this is the perfect time to work out your spirit. So we're going to talk a little bit about silence and solitude today and how they help us to do the thing that's been the theme through this whole series. And that is, we each need to find a way to put ourselves in God's way every single day. That's what a spiritual discipline does. It just puts you in a place to receive God's grace to your face, if I can keep the rhyme going. But it's really just to put yourself in a position to have God speak to you on a daily basis. So we're going to talk about silence. And silence, we could really just understand as limiting what we say, limiting the words that come out of our mouth. And solitude as limiting what we hear, the thoughts, the opinions, the words, the sounds that we hear. Limiting what we say and limiting what we hear for the purpose of listening to God and hearing Him more accurately. You know, I've seen floating around on Facebook this picture, maybe you've seen it too, of a cabin. And the caption said, would you live in this cabin for a year with no internet, no contact with the outside world? Would you live in a cabin for 1 year for $1 million? And that's been around for a long time, but now people are sharing it saying, you all are liars because we know you can't even stay at home for 2 months, even with the internet. But that's solitude, right? Solitude does something to us and we don't like it. Solitude puts us back on our heels and we're not a fan of it. But the truth is, solitude and silence have been used by God to work on His people since the very beginning. And as you read through the Bible, you see lots of periods where God used a period of solitude to build something in a person. And I was studying, as I was reading this book about disciplines, it brought up two in particular. When you look at the Old and New Testament, the two big figures that stand out in the Old Testament is Moses, and in the New Testament is Paul. And both of them had multiple periods of solitude, but really some big ones right at the beginning of their work for God. So in Moses, we see that in Exodus and with his time in the desert, 40 years of living in the desert, being away, but then especially when he leads the people out of Egypt and they come to Mount Sinai, and God calls Moses up to the mountain alone, and he's up there for so long that the people start to think that he is dead. That is some serious solitude. I know we've got some hikers that they would love to be gone that long. They would love to be hiking for so long that people aren't sure whether or not they're still there. That was Moses, and God spoke to him during that time, gave him the 10 Commandments. That's a pretty good reward for spending that time alone. So we know about that one. That was pretty popular, but I was struck by the story of Paul. And often, if you're like me, you've heard the story of Paul and how he was against Christians, and then he met Jesus, and then he's a preacher for Jesus. But there's a period of time in between there. There's a period of preparation, and you read about it in the book of Galatians, chapter 1, starting at verse 15. It says this, "But when God, who had set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by His grace, was pleased to reveal His Son in me, so that I might preach Him among the Gentiles, my immediate response was not to consult any human being. I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was. But," and here it is, "I went into Arabia, and later I returned to Damascus." And then verse 18, "Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas and stayed with them for 15 days. Now, I know it's easy for us to look at a passage of Scripture and we sort of fast forward, but 3 years. 3 years, Paul took time kind of out of the spotlight, maybe not completely alone, but out of the spotlight and time with Jesus. It made him the man he was. It was transformative to spend time apart from everybody else and just hear from the one who had called him. So, what is solitude? Well, solitude, here's a good definition for you. It is a voluntary separating of ourselves from others in order to better hear from God. A voluntary separating from other people so that we can hear from the one who really matters. See, I think what's kind of true through all of this isolation, quarantine, disruption, is it's highlighted for me how we all want what we don't have. So if you've been stuck at home, or if you've kept yourself at home, you just want to get out. You just want to go to a restaurant again, to go to work again, to go out to a movie again. You want what you don't have. But if you think back a couple of months when life was busy, maybe you were running in 12 different directions, all you wanted a couple months ago may have been a quiet night at home. Aren't we funny people that we want what we don't have? If you're in a stage of life like me, when you've got young kids, and I know some of you even have littles running around, all you want is some silence and some solitude, and you can't get it anywhere. You just want a quiet moment. But in talking to people who are grandparents, you know what they want more than anything else? They just want some noise and some interaction. They want time with those grandkids because they're getting plenty of silence and plenty of solitude on the regular basis at home. They want some interaction. We all want what we don't have. We all crave that balance. But what I'm talking about here is not simply just a quiet moment in your house, but a quiet moment intentionally designed to let God speak to you. See, modern life actually makes us pretty uneasy with silence. There's so much noise in our world. We turn on the music whenever we're going anywhere, whenever we drive or we run or we're sitting at home. Maybe we turn the TV on just to have some noise in the background. Like if I were to be quiet right now, I bet you it would get uncomfortable. Let's try it. Could you take that? I couldn't take any more than that. Being silent causes us to become a little bit uneasy, and that's a function of modern life. So can I encourage you, number one, with solitude, resist the urge to always reach for the phone when you're bored or when you have a free moment. Resist the urge to fill those moments with things on your phone. The Lord might even want to use those small moments of what we might call boredom as opportunities to speak to us. Resist that urge to have noise going in the background all the time. If you can find a time to be quiet and to make the atmosphere around you quiet, you'll give God an opportunity to speak to you. So I'm not just saying this. Moses and Paul aren't the only ones who did this. Jesus himself practiced solitude as often as he could get it. The Bible tells us in more than one place that Jesus would often withdraw to lonely places. Now, there were lonely places, but he was never alone because his Father was with him. And those actually fueled him up to spend more time with other people. And so some of us, we fall to one side or the other. We either love being around groups of people, we get energy from that, give me more, and we need to put some intentionality to make sure we don't go overboard and refill our souls. Some of us are oriented the other way, where we naturally stay away from crowds. We want to spend time alone. That by itself is not effective silence and solitude if you're doing your own thing. You need to open up and invite the Lord into those times when you're alone. But for you to practice solitude, you're going to have to actually remove yourself from a situation. Remove yourself from the busyness, from the action, from the noise. So here's a couple of practical suggestions for practicing some silence and some solitude. Number one is something you might have practiced at a big sporting event or an assembly when someone has passed away. They call it a moment of silence. And if you think about a whole room actually being silent for 60 seconds, that's a long time. And it gives you enough time to think and makes an impression. You know, you don't have to spend a whole day without speaking, or you don't have to go to a mountain retreat to get some solitude and quiet with the Lord. If you'll just close your mouth and listen for 60 seconds in the middle of your day, maybe while you're driving, maybe while you're walking, maybe while you're doing something else, or maybe you've got a moment when nobody else is around, and that could be the moment you pull up a phone and scroll through your newsfeed, or maybe that's a moment where you're quiet, and in a moment of silence, see if God might speak something to you. think that's why so many people get great ideas when they're in the shower, because it's one environment where we usually don't have other noise, and our mind actually gets to wander a little bit, and God might actually be able to use those moments when we're getting ready in the morning as a moment of silence to speak to us. Here's another suggestion. Just get out of your house. Take a walk. Take a walk around your neighborhood, and while you're walking, talk to God, and while you're talking, take a moment to just stop talking and let him speak to you. Take a walk. Maybe you don't like to walk, or maybe it's raining. Take a drive. Get in a car and drive, and while you're driving, paying attention to the rules of the road, listen. Listen to what the quiet of that cab of that car, the Lord might use that to speak to you. Maybe you've got little kids, preschoolers, and let me just tell you, it gets better. They get bigger, they get more capable. But while they're little, they need constant attention. And so you might need to find somebody to trade off some time with. Maybe right now a spouse to say, honey, if you could give me 10 minutes completely alone. I mean, even that might be enough if you get some time in a back room of the house. Maybe as things begin to open up and we're able to hang out with each other more, you can say to a friend, you want to swap kids. I'll take yours for an hour, you take mine for an hour. And in that hour, if you can, not use it to get something else done, but to just sit and to be in the presence of God, to take a few moments of quiet when you could be doing all the other things, and let the Lord know that he is the most important thing. So take a moment of silence, take a walk, trade off. There are creative ways to get some time alone. It's been said of John Wesley's mother that she had all these kids running around her house, that she had a signal for them. When she pulled her apron up over her head, that was her signal to her kids to leave her alone. She's talking to God. Now, did that block out any noise? Not really. Was that a quiet place? No, it really wasn't. But it was a signal, a worked out signal with her kids, that when mommy puts the apron over her head, the kids leave her alone. And then when the apron comes off, she's ready to be available to them to get again. And so you'd be amazed what a few minutes alone with Jesus can do for your soul. So many years ago, I heard a pastor say this about our quiet times with God, that we need kind of 3 different functions. Number 1, need to divert daily. Number 2, we need to retreat weekly. And number 3, we need to abandon annually. So divert daily. Daily, at some point in the day, you need some time to divert away from everything else going on and get some quiet time with God. And this works together really well with prayer. Obviously, we want to find a quiet place to pray. We'd love to find a quiet place to read the Bible. As a part of that, would you consider putting in some silence where you stop asking God for things and you simply listen? In that solitude when no one else is speaking, would you listen for the one voice that matters above all else? Divert daily. Number 2, would you think about retreating weekly? That weekly, maybe you give a little bit more time, maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe an hour where you push the other expectations out of the way and you spend some time with God on a walk or on a drive or in a quiet room in your house, wherever people won't come and bother you for a period of time. Would you devote that time to God on a weekly basis? And then last, this would be the big one. If you've done these other things, I could ask you to consider abandoning annually. That one time in the year that you take some serious time to be in solitude. You might go someplace overnight by yourself. Rent an Airbnb or go to a hotel or go to a cabin or pitch a tent in the woods. Go someplace. But even if you can't stay someplace overnight, just to go be alone for most of the day, for an extended number of hours, and just let the Lord speak to you. Bring a Bible with you and read. Talk to him in prayer. Maybe you fast walking into it. Or as we'll talk about in weeks to come, maybe you bring a journal to write down what God speaks to you. But you'd be surprised what the Lord can do when you give him some time alone. And when we're alone with him, when we're silent, sometimes that's really the best time to wrestle with our questions about God. Things we don't understand, the things that maybe we've read in the Bible, but they just don't feel right. We don't understand. They almost don't seem like they could be true. The big questions about God that trip us up. Some of these times of solitude are the moments where God has his answers for us. If we would just be quiet and listen long enough. How do you know you've listened long enough? You got to get past the point where it feels awkward. You got to stay silent long past the point where you're thinking about how silent it is. For the first few minutes, you'll be going, this is weird. This is so weird. I'm being quiet. I'm not actually praying. I'm just listening. No one's talking. I'm not making noise. I should be doing something. That restlessness, it'll take you some time to settle down. So just push through it. Just keep going until you finally break through to the place where you are quiet, where your soul is quiet and is ready to hear from God. So silence, taking some time to not speak, to just be quiet. Solitude, taking some time to not be around noise and to be alone, not with your thoughts, but with God's thoughts. These are two things that people have used since ancient times to connect with God in a meaningful way, discipline to train their soul. And if you do that, I believe you will actually grow in the middle of this whole disruption. So my prayer for all of us is that we would all find a way to be in God's way every day. Man, I love you. Let's see if you got any questions. I don't think I see any questions on here right now as I am searching through. If I miss it, if you've got a question, go ahead and type it in the comments below. I'll be sure to answer through comment now or later. Love to hear your thoughts. How are you practicing silence and solitude? If your life is crazy, and maybe right now it's even crazier, it might be even harder right now to get silence and solitude. What have you found? What have you tried? What's worked? What hasn't worked to get silence and solitude? And if you are living, maybe just you and your spouse, no kids in the home, or you're living alone, how are you finding ways to make some solitude meaningful, some moments of actual meaningful quiet time before God where you just listen, different from the other points in the day where it could be quiet? How do you make it special? I'd love to hear your thoughts, love to answer any of your questions. I'm praying for you. I'm believing that you can grow in your relationship with Jesus far more in this time of disruption than maybe any other time in your life. God bless you. Have a fantastic week.